permaculture is a design system. It's not a technique or a set of techniques. When I'm teaching it, I tell people I'm not here to teach you how to do things. I'm here to teach you how to think about doing things. It's how to select the appropriate response for any given condition. I don't know if you've got enough light. This is what remains of the skeleton of a snake. I have actually been watching this since I first found it about 7 or 8 years ago. It was the full skeleton. And at one point, the tree had kind of wrapped around it. But now, as branches die off, portions of the skeleton have been absorbed into the tree, and this part is being ejected now. But what's fascinating to me is how it got there. It got there the same way. I was standing under another tree a long time ago, and just standing there kind of meditating, looking out over the landscape, deciding what to do next. And these little feathers started floating down around me. And I thought, what is this? And I looked all the way up, and there was a hawk way up above, feeding on the last remnants of a much smaller songbird that was his breakfast for the day. And I was getting the feathers. They were coming down and ultimately would fertilize the same tree, right? That's how this snake got here too. A bird, probably a hawk. Occasionally we get eagles down here too, but more likely it was be a hawk. Flew up there with a snake in its mouth and was preparing to eat, and the snake probably wriggled loose and fell down and got tangled up in the trunk and died there. And this to me became this beautiful kind of very real but extended metaphor for how everything is connected. That is the first of the permaculture natural system principles that we teach. But it also is the first of the 4 principles of all ecosystems. And I always like to incorporate that into my teaching. Everything is connected, which means from macro to micro systems. Think about it this way. All of the water that is on the earth now is all of the water that has always been here, with the possible exception of the tails of a few comets as they pass by. Might give us a little extra, but think of it as a closed system of water. That means that all of these water molecules have been passing through natural systems for as long as we have been evolving. That means that a water molecule that inhabited Einstein's brain might very well end up in your elm tree or your cat or any place else on the planet. Everything is connected. The second principle is everything is always moving. So it's always going someplace else. If you don't think so, just look at the snake. Think in terms of food. Everything gets cycled. It's all moving from one system to another. Small scales back up to large scales. Trees are the perfect embodiment of that. They create their own mulch. A seedling planted in bare ground will end up, by the time it becomes a large, mature tree, it'll be hip deep in soil that it has created, simply by shedding portions of itself as it grows. The third principle, the short version of this would be, the bumper sticker version would be, there's no free lunch. But the more thoughtful explanation of that would be everything that is in a system is serving some useful function within that system, or it would not be there. That means that the system is dependent upon it. As an entire organism, you cannot start removing pieces of the organism before it begins to fall apart. That's very important, even if you don't understand what that's doing. Its function is essential to the life of that organism, and we remove those things at risk of destroying the entire system. So ask yourself, what is it doing? And learn from it. The fourth principle is nature has the final say on everything. We're not in charge. So think of pandemics, think of climate chaos, think of whether your garden is successful or not. Think of how much rain we're getting or snow. That's a storm coming in. We've all been waiting for it. So you might as well just go out and water right now. Nature will decide whether that rain or snow is going to drop right here. In the meantime, we're not in charge. Okay. So when, for example, you're thinking about separating areas, dividing areas, think long and carefully about the amount of porosity that you want between those two areas. How many exchanges can take place? In other words, are you trying just to keep out the big animals, or are you trying to keep out everything? Because if you put up a solid wall, that's going to deflect a lot of energy and create extremes on one side or the other. If it's a relatively open and porous border, then you are simply going to be filtering out by size and mobility the things that can go between, including wind. When we're around here, wind is a huge factor. So people have this tendency to put extreme massive walls, which is silly. Over here, behind this house, is a volcanic lava flow. It's a big mesa. That is the equivalent of a wall. When the winds come from the southwest, which they do powerfully certain times of the year, what happens is it creates a vacuum, and they come down here and they hammer us right at this distance. So be careful when you're building walls. Around here, generally the best thing to do is to break up and disperse that energy, convert it into a little bit of heat and warmth. You can do that, again, by planting hedgerows, because the outer edges of that then are actually warmed, and that warmth continues onto the inside, and it keeps the entire region much warmer. It also will harvest rain, and frequently we get rain by the buckets rather than in gentle showers. And so if you plant along a fence line, that rain will concentrate down at the root level and actually assist in growing your plants. So these are late beans and morning glories. And here, next year we'll have a solid wall of beans. Remember too that when insects and the birds that come to feed on both the insects and the plants want some place to perch, they will be concentrating their droppings. That's extra fertility. It's all a gift. I think virtually every home landscape could benefit from using some of the principles of hedgerow planting as ways of not only protecting and enclosing, but exchanging, benefiting from all of the exchanges, because you can grow tough, medicinal, beautiful, wildlife feeding, healthful plants, food plants. You can grow jujube, you can grow hawthorn, you can grow brambles, and they're extremely well adapted. Back in here I have Manchurian apricots that give wonderful small fruit. I have sumac that have wonderful fruit. Limonitas, it's called. You can make lemonade out of it, except that it's packed with vitamin C, and it's local, and it's as tough as it gets. Choke cherries. Yeah, we're looking at a Russian hawthorn, which I planted about 6 years ago, just as a baby, a seedling. And it obviously is very happy here. All of these things are incorporated into this natural hedgerow right here. And they're all thriving without any supplemental irrigation. Building soil, protecting me from the noise pollution of my neighbors and from the road up here, and they're feeding wildlife. The scouring winds come through here late winter and early spring, and this protects against all of that wind damage. So it probably keeps the inner garden area 10 to 15 degrees warmer than it was when we first moved in and had none of this protection. And I've incorporated a lot of native plants, some of the toughest plants on the outside, and then a few exotics, if you will, that are extraordinarily well adapted to this climate and work well. So we're creating a recombinant ecology, if you will. It's a new organism, and these guys are all learning how to work together. We're maximizing all the beneficial exchanges. And diversity in and of itself is meaningless. It's kind of a nice buzzword that people throw around, but if I were to plant a banana tree and a pineapple or a palm tree, that would be adding diversity. It would also be incredibly stupid, because they wouldn't make it through our winters. They wouldn't make it through our summers either. So diversity in and of itself has no value. What is valuable is the number of beneficial exchanges that we can create. That's the foundation of our design system. So, what is nature always trying to do? She's always trying to hold on to, in any given system, all of the materials, the resources, the natural wealth of that system for as long as it can before it leaves the system. So on a more basic level, around here, what do we lack? We lack water. We live in an arid environment. As a secondary, we lack soil. That's partially because we lack water, but also because we have not been allowing the system to replenish itself. Soil building is one way of holding on to water. So it's all about beneficial exchanges. We can actually add to a system and build up its wealth without having to deplete in any way by adding more living material to the system. So I plant more trees. I don't cut them down. The trees that I do have to remove, I never leave the system. I will either chip them, or I'll use them for firewood, or I will inoculate them with mushroom spawn and grow mushrooms, and then as it decomposes, it goes back into the ground. But it's all additionally building soil. And almost as an afterthought, it's also feeding and nourishing me so that I can continue to build up the wealth of the system. One circle. Leeks and celery love to grow together. These are beans in between. I'm hoping to get one little late crop, but it's to build fertility. And then when it gets cold, the beans will die, but the celery and leeks are perfectly hardy, and they'll grow right through the winter. And kind of sifting and sorting, because these are flowers for early in the season. So I'll mulch around them, but let them grow up too, because that'll bring in a lot of insects. as early as March and April. This is plantain, which is actually good for you. It tastes nice and green. But remember, I'm about 180 years old. So.
Yeah, this one looks lovely. I see this little one here. Both nice. I'm confused. Both useful for hound and catnip, but different. Yeah, hi. So I'm Hannah. I live just up the street from Michael, and I'm currently taking his permaculture class. I'm an herbalist, so I'm working with Michael to process a lot of his plant medicines, because as you can see, he has his hands full. Is this purslane?
That's purslane. I'm simply...
Do you eat it?
Okay.
So I'm a big believer in doing everything as much as you can locally. And I have a background in natural medicine and have seen a lot of herbs imported and herbs used in a sort of allopathic way and just in a non-sustainable way. And so I would really like to see a lot more local medicines being used by our community in a more holistic manner as well, right? Like not using this plant to treat this or use this for this. It's more kind of using the whole plant to treat the whole person. And so that's where I'm really getting more into alchemy and spagyrics, but also growing and harvesting them in a permaculture, like kind of biodynamic way to hopefully, learn more and integrate more native plants or plants that grow here so that we can be a more sustainable community through our food and through our medicine as well. Cool. So yeah, and see the white flowers of catnip.
Actually,
that's one indication of it being associated with the moon. Yeah, there we go. And it has the kind of lighter colored undersurface of the leaf, which is kind of another indicator. And Michael, you drink catnip quite a bit, don't you?
Yeah.
What do you use it for?
I tend to think of it as balancing, helping to, because I tend to exert a lot of energy, so I like something that will help me to relax without getting drowsy.
Yeah, and it's a gentle nervine or a relaxing herb.
Yeah.
And it has a specific affinity for the digestive system, so like calming for especially digestive issues when you have like some nervous stomach sort of issues. Very gentle. I think it's kind of in the same vein as chamomile, where it can be taken by children, right, or elderly. With that. So I'm going to make a tincture out of it, but I've been starting to experiment with using something called a soxolate, which does like a percolation extraction through heating up alcohol and then percolating it through a chamber to extract a wider range of constituents than a single tinctured herb would. But you can also tincture it fresh and dry, typically around 50% alcohol is the best way if you're going to use just like folk method, where you would just chop up the plant or break it apart with your hands, put it in a jar, and then add alcohol.
The old guttural English Teasel. Okay. It was how they pronounced thistle. And the name came down as Teasel, but it's also where we get the word tease, as in teasing out yarn. They would actually use these seed heads. Most plants will shed water off their leaves around the outer edges of the plant. This one captures the water and concentrates it in these little cups. This one's gotten kind of tattered, but earlier in the season you could see very clearly, and it would actually hold that water, and travelers would drink from it, take the liquid, because it's concentrating a lot of the medicinal value that comes off of the leaf into that water. So it becomes like its own, not tincture, what's the technical term, when it's water-based?
Infusion.
An infusion, yeah. And in fact, they called it the Tears of Venus. And it was especially good for eyes, but also just to kind of recharge your energy. And if you look at the shape of it, it's here to benefit the soil, to rejuvenate soils that have been damaged. So it is actually functioning kind of like a syringe. It has a deep tap root.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah,
right
I was
down,
wondering about the roots.
And it's concentrating the medicine and putting it down deep into the soil.
The water medicine.
The water. Yeah, so it's healing that
This
whole
type of
process.
root. That's really cool.
Every weed, so-called weed, every plant that is growing someplace is there specifically to help heal, and it's telling you what the conditions are. And
So I'm thinking about what you just said about the plants growing, where they're growing, they're telling you something about the soil. What would like a lot of tumbleweed growing in the soil tell you?
that it needs a lot of ground cover.
Yeah. So a lot of it perhaps has been blown away. A lot of the topsoil has been blown away.
Yeah, a lot of it has either the nutrients have been taken away. If you think about most farms, even organic farms, they plant a bunch of stuff, they nurture it to the extent that they need for the market, then they cut it off and export it, take it off the farm. It doesn't go back onto the farm. And so it's a process of extraction and depletion. And, you know,
The
organic
inputs do not equal
farmers,
the outputs.
yeah, if you're going far and wide for inputs to replace what you have shipped off, then that's also work. That's not sustainable. Okay. So that is part of the foundation of the whole permaculture teaching. It has to be sustainable, which means that most of it has to stay here, local, in the community. So we get hay from right down the road here and bring that in to feed the horses, and then we share the manure with farms, any smart farmers up and down the valley.
And so that would be kind of maybe one of the first steps to replenishing the soil, right? So say we have a big plot of land.
Yeah, one of the simplest things to do, okay, remember the haiku yesterday? Garden like a meadow farm like a prairie. A prairie never loses its ground cover. It always has something growing. Even when the tops get browsed by herds of buffalo or whatever, or a prairie fire comes through, the top is this much. The roots go that deep, and it's always ready to spring back to life. So that's what we have to do. Is that kind of scale, you always want to have ground cover. Actually, every scale, even gardens, we should always be mulching or have some living material growing to cover the soil. Nature hates a vacuum, and bare earth is a vacuum, so she immediately tries to cover it. And the things that come in to cover it, unfortunately, most people call weeds. They're here to help. They're not here to tick you off.
Even that
That's the
tumbleweed?
polite version. Even tumbleweeds. Yeah. They are simply telling you, hey, you've done a really bad job of maintaining your soil. So I'm here to help. Get out of the way. This is an amaranth. Yeah. These are all different amaranths.
So
You can certainly harvest a seed. Entire civilizations have been based on the seed, although these particular selections have largely been grown just for ornament. The ones that you want to grow for seed would have huge
More seed.
flowers, heads,
Yeah.
and then you shake that out and it's intensely labored.
You don't get a lot of
No,
seed per your
because
labor.
they're little
Yeah.
teeny grains. You can also eat the greens when they're young, like a lot of the quinopods.
Right, like lamb's quarters, right? That's the one that does really cool. It's amazing what the plants will tell us from just observing them.
Yeah, if we just shut up and listen.
What else do we have going on? I'm just really grateful to be kind of a part of this process as it is unfolding, as I see this as a really important paradigm to follow as we move forward in our world, not only in farming, but in how we treat each other and the kinds of communities that we're forming. So,
Probably a good thing. I'd be
Yeah,
rolling
especially-
around in my herb bed.
but you do that anyway.
But only on full moons.
It's the last night. Any plants that are unturned, that's because Michael was
Everything's
rolling
crushed and
around
flat.
in his herb bed.
Yeah, I tried to brush it up.
Wonderful.
It's all a gift. It's all being given to us. So design carefully so that the system can absorb those gifts and make immediate use of them. See, all of these things are going to lose their leaves in a few weeks, and this becomes this perfect collection spot for me. And I come out here and rake it, and I have all this free leaf mold. Raccoons.